Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on this webinar about our Seed Emergency Response Tool, otherwise known as the SERT. We'll refer to it as the SERT throughout most of this webinar. My name is Andrea Mottram, and I'm the Director of Agriculture Systems at Mercy Corps. I'm joined today by James Mulcairn from Wageningen University and Abby Love from Mercy Corps, who are both helping us with the critical background work for this webinar. Thank you both for helping us with that. And I have the pleasure of presenting together with a few speakers that many of you have probably heard of or met before. So first off, we have Louise Spelling, who is the Research Director at SeedSystem. I know many of you probably already know she's an internationally renowned SeedSystem expert and has been working on the SERT with us over the past year or so. We also have Stephen Walsh, who's the Senior Agriculture Advisor with the Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance at USAID, and again, has many decades of experience in seed systems and agriculture. Wilfred Uko is also joining us. He is the ISSD Africa Program Manager for Mercy Corps based in Kenya, and he leads our ISSD Africa work together with Abby Love, who funded the SERT work. And then we also have Meseret Getahun, and Meseret is a Senior Market Systems Development Advisor for the RIPA program in Ethiopia. So she's working a lot right now with market systems development, but has a significant seed expertise in seed systems as well, and reviewed the SERT for us. So before we start today, I just wanted to run through a little bit of housekeeping. Next slide, thank you, James. So most importantly today, we have French interpretation available. So if you haven't already, please select a language. Even if your choice is English, you need to select that as a language. You'll find the interpretation button right there at the bottom of your screen. You can see there's a little guidance there on the slide on the left. So just click either the English or the French, depending on which you want to hear in. On the right-hand side of the slide, you'll also see a little bit of guidance on how to change between speaker view and gallery view, depending on your preference for seeing who's speaking or the whole gallery of panelists once we come off the slides on the screen. If you have any problems with either of those, please send a private chat message to James or Abby in the chat. Because we've got a large audience today, only the panelists and the will have microphones and cameras enabled. So please introduce yourself in the chat if you haven't already. And we will have time for questions today, so please put those in the chat as well. There won't be a separate box for you to put them in. Please go ahead and put those in the chat. And also feel free to answer each other's questions. I mean, many of us on this call today have lots of experience besides just the panelists. So please feel free to help answer questions and add your experience in the chat as well. Next slide, please. So our agenda today includes some background on the SERT, or the Seed Emergency Response Tool, reflections from Stephen at USAID, an overview of the SERT content by Louise, and then some reflections from Meseret and from Wilfred. And as I mentioned, there will be time for questions. If we don't get through all the questions today, which I'm sure we probably won't, given how many people we have on the call, we will do our best to respond to those after the event and send those together with the recording of the webinar and a link to the SERT document by the end of this week. Next slide, please, James. So just as a quick background to the SERT and where it came from, the SERT is funded by the Swiss Agency for Development Corporation through the ISSD Africa program and Community of Practice, and that is led by Wageningen University. This program currently has 8 research topics, of which Mercy Corps leads 2 of them, and they're highlighted in bold there. And so the SERT is part of the activities that are under the effective seed insecurity response topic. And this focuses on really improving the impact of emergency seed interventions, as well as enabling emergency interventions to create more resilient and improved systems in the long term. So how can we do that within the humanitarian emergency space? And then in addition to this topic, we also lead the developing the seed sector in fragile states topic as well. And we actually have another guidance document coming out very soon that's focused on assessing the context for seed interventions specifically in conflict settings and fragile states. So watch out for a webinar on that coming up in July as well. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Stephen Walsh for a few thoughts on seed systems at USAID BHA. As many of you know, USAID has been one of the biggest funders of seed aid over the last few decades and has funded much of the existing guidance on seed systems in emergency setting that this SERT builds on, and also provided input and review to this SERT as well. Steve, over to you.
Thank you very much, Andrea, and thank you for the opportunity to make a few introductory comments. Again, my name is Stephen Walsh. I'm a senior agriculture advisor with the Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance. Well, I'm going to cover 3 points today. So the first area is the importance of agriculture and seed in BHA. The second point is to make a quick reference to some of the chronic seed issues that we've identified in looking at the different BHA applications that come in. And the third area is just a reminder as to why this tool and why this SERT is a critically important resource for the community of practitioners working in seed. Next slide. So the importance of agriculture, first of all, in BHA, just to give you an idea, in FY21, we had a total of 185 applications, of which 121 had seed and seedling components. In our total value, our total portfolio, FY21 for ag alone was more than $225 million. I think many folks know, but it's worth reiterating, BHA is amongst the largest donors working in emergency seed aid. BHA also has a requirement and has had a requirement for a few years that when an applicant provides seed provision in more than 3 consecutive years in a given area, they're expected to do a seed assessment. And we've also, over the years, provided a lot of support to encourage and promote tools and methods regarding assessments. And this is seen both through the SSSA work and most recently with the RSSA under S34D, led by Catholic Relief Services. Next slide, please. So what are some of the chronic seed issues that we identify within our ag applications? I'll quickly run through these. One is, quite frankly, a lack of needs assessment. Virtually no seed insecurity characterization with applications that come in which suggest that there is seed insecurity and that farmers need to be supported with seed. Yet we just don't see, in many cases, an actual analysis of the underlying seed needs of the target farmers. So there's really the need to do better here. The second area is when we do see need assessments, there's often very little rigor, almost no reference to the methodology used as part of the assessment. Thirdly, there is often, more often than not, no recognition of local seed sources. In other words, acknowledgement that in most years and in most locations for most crops, the dominant place where farmers source their seed is not formal channels. However, this is more often not recognized in the applications that we receive. The fourth point is that the response modalities that our partners undertake in emergencies, these tend towards direct distribution. Yes, there has been an increased effort to embrace markets, and this is appreciated and has been, widely supported and encouraged by BHA. But we still see opportunities to do a better job here, particularly with the idea of promoting more market pluralism, encouraging more market participants from the supply side to participate when there are markets that are being promoted. The fifth area, seed quality. Seed quality is often identified as an issue in applications, yet there's no discussion as to what the crop-specific seed quality issues are. And then the last couple of points, we often see a reference to improved seed or to climate smart agriculture, which suggests that there's oftentimes it's a suggestion that there's an issue with the underlying characteristics or varieties that farmers are currently using. However, we don't see an underlying discussion in the applications as to what are the varietal or characteristics issues with the varieties that farmers are currently using. So these are a whole series of issues that we think could be better addressed with more attention and consideration of resources like SERT. And then the last point here is that formal seed certification is also viewed by many of our applicants as a requirement with no alternatives. And a close read of our guidelines would indicate that, yes, while it's true that we do like to see certified seed, we certainly have a very clear process for supporting when uncertified seed is sought by our partners. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, my last point is just a reminder that this is a really important tool, principally because seed aid continues to have persistent challenges, and we're seeing that seed aid in emergencies is growing significantly. So there's really a really significant opportunity here to do a better job, and to do a better job both in terms of diagnosing the emergency seed needs and in terms of leveraging existing capacities. We see that SERT is an important resource, not simply in and of itself, but because it builds on the existing seed assessment tools and resources that have been developed over the last couple of decades. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. The next slide, please, James. And I think the next one too. So as Steve touched on in his comments, I think, seed aid is rising a lot. 121 proposals, I think you said it was, Steve, that had seed components in FY21 for USAID alone. And it's also increasingly repetitive, especially, for example, like countries like Ethiopia that have had seed assistance for more than 40 years now. So this repetitive seed aid, if it's done incorrectly, can really do harm. And we've seen that sometimes where it can create farmer dependency as well as damage seed enterprises. So that's not only seed enterprises that are supported by the NGOs or the seed companies or state-supported producers or traders themselves, but also small traders and local market sellers of seed as well. And so whilst there are a number of specialized guidance and manuals out there to help improve our interventions, we felt that there was a significant gap for a practical overview guide on seed aid practice, and that also touches on market-based activities as well, which is a key focal point for Mercy Corps too. Next slide, please. So over the last good year or so, a good 2 years since we started ISSD Africa topics, Mercy Corps through ISSD Africa has worked with Louise at SeedSystem, together with input from Wageningen University, but also USAID and a number of implementers to build on all of this currently existing information and develop the SERT. And it's important to note here that we spent a lot of time with the help of Louise's expertise in reviewing all the key existing seed-related documents and the lessons learned from the past 30 years, and including some of your wisdom from some of you as well that have implemented and reviewed the draft of the SERT. So we really spent a long time digging into what's already existing and incorporating that. And that is referenced a lot in the document as well. So it's developed for all of those working really in seed systems, from policymakers to country staff engaged in emergency and early recovery work, and particularly for non-technical staff as well as experienced professionals, given that many staff working in emergency contexts are often not agricultural specialists. We felt it was important to ensure that we gave some solid background to seed systems as well, so that it's applicable for technical as well as non-technical staff. And the aim of this SERT is to really provide guidance on seed security, really importantly, assessing the needs, as Stephen mentioned in his introduction. That's really critical to make sure we choose the right interventions. It also is about setting goals and choosing among the right responses to meet those goals in specific shocks and stressed environments, and then designing responses and evaluating them as well. So the document will be released at the end of this week in English. It will also be in French as well a few weeks later than that. And as I mentioned, it is complemented by the context analysis tool that's specifically focused on seed systems in conflict settings and the challenges that they provide. And that will be out in July too. And one, I think, important point to just note before I hand over to Louise is that this is a continually evolving document. And we see this really as version 1. We've had input from a number of people, but it's not, it's only until we test this tool and people start using that we really see where the good things are and things that might need improving. So so please keep that in mind as you read through the document, and we'll be asking for your feedback over the next year or so too. So I'm going to hand over to Louise Spelling now. Louise has spent many hours and worked tirelessly with us over a long period of time to get the SERT to where it is now, of which we're very grateful. Louise is going to lead us now through the structure and the content of the SERT. Thanks, Louise, over to you.
Yes, good. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I am going to speak slowly, recognizing that we do have translation, which is just wonderful. But if I'm not clear, please add comments at any point. I'm going to go over the central features of the SERT, the Seed Emergency Response Tool. Please know that this is a document that's about 75 pages. So I'm just going to give a few highlights of what you might find in a very global sense. Okay, so the first thing is the SERT reviews seed system fundamentals. It introduces you to formal systems, informal seed systems, and the intermediary systems, all of which can be important in emergency response. So you see formal, we look at government and commercial systems. The informal, which is the purple, we emphasize the value of farmers' own harvests, their social networks, the local markets. And we even introduce you to some of the intermediary, like for instance, ISSD's local seed businesses, like community-based seed enterprises. All of these systems are important for emergencies, and we help you with the basics. Next. Okay, essential feature of SERT is to emphasize goals. There are varied goals in seed assistance. You know, it's not just about procuring seed and delivering it. Good seed aid is designed, even during an emergency, to address farmers' goals. So for instance, you can have a goal of food security in your seed aid. You can have a goal of trying to boost nutrition, of trying to encourage resilience. You can even have a goal of trying to increase income during an emergency, but it has to be designed. In our SERT, we particularly emphasize seed systems and resilience programming. You know, we'd love to have your input here. We need much more detail. Next. The SERT reviews what we think are all the emergency response options known and implemented to date. We really hope we're not missing something, so please add. The interventions generally fall into 3 categories. So look at the dark gray. There is direct distribution as an aid intervention, and then there are different types of direct distribution. They're market-based approaches, but focused on clients. And then they're market-based approaches focused on suppliers. In each of these categories, we try to tie the type of intervention with the type of problem. So for instance, if you have a seed availability problem, what might be your response options? If you have a quality problem, what might be your response options? And then for each of these response options, we look at the strengths and weaknesses. There is no perfect response. Every response has strengths and weaknesses. So if you're going to, for instance, provide modern varieties, well, there's some strengths, but there are also a lot of weaknesses. And we want to help you make informed decisions. Next. Okay, this is just to remind you that for response options, they're really quite a range. That doing a direct seed distribution, which is on the left, is really different from doing a cash transfer, which is on the right. But all of them might address a seed need. Next. Steve mentioned this, and so did Andrea. A really unique feature of the SERT is that we put a lot of emphasis on market-based responses. We generally feel that strengthening markets in emergency periods can have wider gains, but also longer-term ones. And we're trying to explore this in some detail. We do work on market-based support for formal markets, like agro-dealers, and that's the slide on the right. But we're also exploring market-based responses for the informal markets. So for instance, can you try to support traders who move local seed from one region to another in an emergency response? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What do we still need to learn? Next. We have a lot of decision trees. Actually, we have about 7. And the decision trees are to help you, whether you're an individual or an NGO or a government or a UN agency, to go step by step through the decisions that you need to make to decide on a response or not. So for instance, the first decision tree is an overview one. And you look at the red, is a seed security linked intervention even feasible? Yes, no, and we always ask for the evidence. So the second column always asks, what is the evidence to your answer? And then if you look at the green on the left, there's a series of very logical questions. Is the farming population ready to engage in agriculture? Does the population have the means to engage in agriculture, land, labor, other inputs, credit? What is the evidence you have for this? Again, you can do this as an individual, but you can also do this as a team exercise. Next. Another example of a decision tree, much more refined as you're going down, is you've identified the constraint of seed access. Okay, seed access is a problem, but what are your possible response options? And the different blue vertical lines, well, you could do cash, you could do vouchers, you could do a seed voucher and fair, you could even do a direct seed distribution if there's a seed access problem. But how do you know what to choose? So one of the key questions, if you look at the green, is does the context allow for this type of intervention? Okay, then you walk it through. So I'm just giving you an example here to show you the detail of these trees. You look under cash and you say, are there sufficient market outlets supplying formal or informal seed? Are the outlets within reasonable distance? Is it safe, feasible for recipients to travel? Do donors, governments even allow for a cash response? So we give detail because we want all of us to make practical, doable decisions. We want to plan step by step. Next. Okay, the real core of this SERT, this Seed Emergency Response Toolkit, is a set of guiding principles. We honestly hope that these principles for good, better practice, become adopted worldwide. So not just USAID, not just ISSD, not just SeedSystem, but that they become the guiding principles for international UN donor practice. There are 10 principles, and I want to tell you they span about 5 pages. They're really detailed, and they go on 10 themes. So they go the range of what you need to know in a seed security intervention. So assessment, response type, the goal, timeliness, seed quality, all the way down to feedback. So 10 principles along the whole process. We've integrated gender into each. So rather than put gender as something separate, we feel it's so integral that it has to be woven into every single guiding principle. Next. Just want to give you an example of a principle so you understand the detail. So the principle number 7 says crop and variety choice. And then it reads, the crops and varieties selected for the intervention should suit the context and user needs. Okay, makes sense. What does it mean in detail for better practice? So what we've done is outline 8 separate issues that would guide the implementation of this principle. For instance, just giving you an example, but look at them all. You know, should you use traditional or modern varieties? What's better practice? For varietal preferences, how do you include gender? For crop preferences, how do you include gender? How do you shape this principle so it recognizes farmers' realistic management conditions? GMOs, if you use them, what is better practice? So while we have these general global humanitarian principles, we've tried to give all of us, the users, the practitioners, some very specific technical advice. Again, these are evolving. We can't wait to have your feedback on many of the details. The details matter. Next. Finally, we have a lot of technical support aids within this CERT. You know, we're not showing you everything, but we've tried to respond to your needs. And you've asked us to do certain things. So you asked us, for instance, what are the indicators of acute shock versus chronic stress in seed security? What would you see? You know, can you give us seed quality advice? Where do we find it? What is essential? And then we have lots of evaluation checklists, not just immediately after the intervention, but post-harvest, after 1 season, after 3 seasons. What kinds of things should you be looking for? You know, again, we're trying to develop this CERT to meet your practical needs, and these are things that you've asked us for. Next. Next, please. So finally, just in sum, this is, we can't wait till you see the document on Friday. What does CERT do? Does SeedSystem fundamentals, formal, informal, intermediary systems, all are key for emergency. It charts what we think are all the known seed response types, the direct ones, but particularly the market-based ones. We have decision trees. They look complicated, but if you start to walk through them and use them, they become much easier. They become livable, doable. We do have these 10 best practice principles for implementation. Again, we hope that these become global, that they set international standards, and then we have lots of resources, including many from you on this call. You'll see in the CERT that, you know, many of you have been referenced, have been cited, have helped develop this work, so we thank you. Next. Next and last, you know, finally with this CERT, we hope that the advice is very practical, and we hope that this kind of practical grounded advice improves the seed aid field very quickly. It should improve the field widely and quickly. You now have the resources. Your feedback isn't just welcome, it's urgently needed. Different people you can contact for feedback at any level. Critique is welcome, additions are welcome. This is an evolving document. You know, working together on SEED, I know we can improve the field very quickly. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Louise. And as Louise mentioned, it's just a quick summary of the content of the SERT, and we will send that out to you in the next couple of days. You can dig into the details a bit more, but that will give you some guidance on what exactly is in it and how it works. Thanks so much for that, Louise. And I just want to reiterate that last point of Louise's there, in that it's us working together and using these guides as a collective learning, and from it, learning from each other, sharing what works, what doesn't, and improving them, so that we can use them to improve our work. So please reach out anytime with your thoughts and experience. We have included a number of reviews from different sectors, but it's only through trialing and testing this tool in real life that we get to learn how it works. James, I think we can bring everyone back to the full screen now. Before going into open questions, I wanted to first allow some time for reflections from Meseret and Wilfred. Firstly, Meseret, you reviewed the document for us and provided feedback to improve it, and thank you for taking time out of your program to do that for us. From your experience of SeedSystem in Ethiopia and your technical review of the draft SERT, could you just share with us, where you see the SERT being most valuable for country teams, and any reflections from your review? And you can all go ahead and put your cameras on now.
Thank you, Andrea, and hello, everyone. So for me, when I see the SERT, I found it a good document, for a country like Ethiopia, with a very complex seed system. Like the informal seed system is takes the major share, and even the formal seed sector is highly dominated by the public and limited involvement of the private sector. So doing a seed response is very challenging. And having a document like the SERT with the guidance, tools, and also positive and negative experiences is very critical. Like the decision tree that Louise has already shared, it shows you what factors to consider when you decide intervention types. When I first start reading the document, it says like inappropriate seed aid increases the farmer's vulnerability, which is true. It's costing their time, their resource, their land, their labor, and the like. So it's important to decide what kind of interventions that we are going to put in place. So the SERT gives this guidance. In addition, like what comes to my mind is when thinking of emergency responses, for instance, cash transfer, you can find a number of guiding documents on how to do it. But when it comes to seed, there are only few documents available. So the interesting thing about the SERT is it also links information from these available documents. So that's one of the interesting things. It have like evaluation tools, what to consider, when to do the evaluation after seed response. So these are very important things I found in the document. In addition, Louise have been showing that there was like a different approach that we can implement this seed response, can be the direct, the markets-based approach and the like. So as Mercy Corps, mostly when we do any emergency response, we try to make it market system-based approach. And for other organizations, also voucher-based seed response is becoming common. So one interesting thing I found in the SERT document, we were like mainly focusing on the client side, on the individuals, on the farmers who were affected by the shock, but it also have a market-based approach, indicates a market-based approach, which shows you how you can support the market actors or the seed suppliers. So I found it very interesting. And as you have been mentioning, it's not like for beginners or for the experts, it serves for both. So it's interesting document that we can utilize for our implementation. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks so much, Meseret, and thanks again for reviewing and including your thoughts to that. And I think the market-based work is a really interesting component, and one that we often struggle sometimes to include in our humanitarian work. I noticed there's a question around that timeline in the chat, so I think it's a great piece for us to grapple with more. Wilfred, a question for you. Wilfred, you lead the ISSD program for us and have been working a lot on this SERT, but you just returned from Northeast Nigeria, where you were training the team there to test and use the SERT probably for the first time, I think. Would you like to just share some of your experience and the team's reactions to the tool, any challenges and things that were working from your perspective?
Thanks a lot, Andrea. And perhaps I could give a background to that Nigerian mission, that it was a collaboration between the Mexico-led ISSD Africa topics 1 and 2, and there's a developing seed sector in fragile states and effective seed insecurity response, and the Mexico-Nigeria fraternity. And the aim basically was to help the team there to acquaint themselves with the seed emergency response tool, with the sort of ultimate goal of testing this tool in the deep field, but also using this tool later to improve their programs. And so during this Nigerian mission, I had an opportunity to have discussions with both public and private seed sector stakeholders. And of course, with regards to seed intervention in emergencies, the discussions revealed a huge gap between organizational intentions in seed interventions and the reality on the ground, which essentially should be informing seed intervention decisions. And so a SERT comes in handy in two ways. Or the seed emergency response tool comes in handy in two ways. And one is for non-seed experts. SERT provides in-depth and comprehensive technical background with real sort of explanations of seed systems concepts. But it also has decision trees sort of to guide quick selection of appropriate seed response options, which is a great thing. And to me, from what I saw from the participants to the training, and I believe a few of them are in this webinar, there's huge acceptance of the tool, with up to 93% of the participants indicating that they will adopt and use this tool to guide the agricultural programs. But more importantly, the concept of seed security, seed system security sort of stood out as one of the key takeaways, given the direct link between seed security parameters and the choice of seed response. And so as a next step, of course, we are planning to have the deep field testing of the tool end of June. And then we hope to have sort of the results of that survey by mid-July, which will then share widely with multi-stakeholders within Nigeria. Thank you, Andrea.
Great, thank you, Wilfred. And I noticed there was a comment in the chat that they're just about to go out and test that now, so that's great to see. Would the panelists like to put their videos on now, and then we can go to some of the questions in the chat? I noticed there was some great comments earlier on around some of the informal seed systems and locally produced seeds. You know, seed localization is vital for humanitarian seed responses, and good to see we're emphasizing local procurement and need to define what is improved seeds. A lot of comments around that, which is great to see. There was one question on from Lucho. Will feedback be eventually integrated into a new version in the midterm? Louise, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. Well, first of all, your feedback is essential. We'd like a lot of it, positive, negative. You know, Lucha, at this point, we want to get version 1 out. It's been a full year. We haven't discussed yet the timing of a version 2, but there will be one. So the answer is absolutely yes. We'd like it tested in English and French. Maybe we'll be even thinking of another language in the future, but we'd like it used first before we think about, there have to be many, many, many more lessons before we get a version 2. You know, we could consider an evolving document. I'm just thinking about, you know, we could consider some sort of communications which update the document without redoing it entirely. So we have to think about that. But we'd like this living. We don't want it to sit on shelves. So good question.
Great, thank you, Louise. What else have we got in here? There's one from Marja. How can we convince policymakers to endorse and promote the use of this excellent tool, and also embracing the guiding principles? I think, Steve, that was one thing that you mentioned. It's, you know, we need this to be used. And so how do we do that beyond the implementers as well? I don't know if that's something that you would like to talk to.
Yeah, I just think, I think we need to, at this point, just do it. The tools have been made and provided. Multiple organizations have developed tools. This is not the first, you know, rodeo on this stuff. It's been going on for years. So there's all kinds of tools out there. There's been all kinds of capacity support. I do think we need to recognize that there's been some institutional issues and some motivations towards not doing assessments and towards sort of, I think, overly estimating what needs are. Like there are certain, you know, benefits that accrue by, you know, not doing needs assessments. So I think at a certain point, and I think we're reaching that point, we need to do better assessments. And if they're not assessments that are done, funding should not be provided. There's too much work to be done, and there's too much of a need for coordination across partners for this not to occur. So that's my perspective. That's not a institutional perspective. That's a personal statement over.
Can I comment on Marja's question?
Sure, go ahead.
I think it's a great question. I mean, how do you start to institutionalize the principles? And we should have mentioned that separate from the SERT, we're developing with ISSD, and thanks to ISSD, a video just on the principles. So it's a standalone. I think we should map a strategy. The principles were not developed by us alone. You know, I should have said they build very much on, FAO developed some principles in 2004. I know that there's a new volume, Seed, that has some humanitarian principles, and we've tried to incorporate this into this global set. But we need a strategy to get these to the UN cluster, to get them to key donor governments, and that has to be done not passively, but very actively. So good question, Marja. We have to set up a session once we get this out, and once we launch the principles video, to actively figure out how to get government buy-in, UN buy-in, NGO buy-in, donor buy-in. This might be the most important part of the SERT, actually, these principles. Thanks.
Great, thank you both. And a practical question, I think, on the content, is the SERT designed as an add-on to the SSSA, or is it standalone? I think Wilfred or Louise, you might want to answer that one.
Yeah, it's very different. The SSSA is a set of tools for the assessment phase, and particularly to choose responses. The SERT is much more comprehensive of the whole seed aid diagnostic and development process. So both of them are very complementary, actually.
Thanks, Louise. And actually another practical question from Bo from FAO rep. What is the best practice of the seed test in countries without ISTA accredited laboratories? It often takes a long time to have the results, which might not be feasible in the emergency context of getting at seed quality.
Is that asked to
Sorry,
whom?
open to anyone. Open to anyone.
Yeah, I can answer that. I'll just say that if we look at what we're seeing, at least at a BHA level, when we see seed quality assurances that are provided for what is considered to be certified seed or identified as certified seed, the vast majority of these simply involve a germination test and some statement that confirms the integrity of the variety in question. More often than not, moisture content is not covered. I've never seen virus indexing to date or any sort of tests for pest or pathogen besides basic visual inspection. So in short, what we're seeing with almost all of these certifications is germination tests. Germination tests, the approach to doing that is extremely simple for most crops, for most true seed crops. So the opportunity for a partner to be able to conduct its own germination tests, to do some basic simplified sampling and do germination tests, this is well within the capacity of, I would say, every single partner that works in seed and works in agriculture with BHA. Over.
Thanks, Steve. I think that's a really important point that, sometimes we tend to overcomplicate our testing, and it can be done fairly easily, and working with farmers to test their own. So thanks for that, Steve. One question from Sean McGuire. We'll be interested to see the evaluation questions, which I'm sure will be insightful. However, emergency funding is often short-term, typically a year, so there's limited scope for good quality impact evaluation at a project level. Would BHA be supporting longer-term implementation to get such higher quality evaluations? I guess that's Tuesday.
I'm not really comfortable answering that question because it's not I'm not able to answer that question. I will say that if we're interested in promoting and supporting better quality seed aid over a multiple year period, it's really important to do a better job of documenting seed system assessments and sharing those assessments. And I think as a community, we're just not doing a very good job of that. Over.
Thanks, Steve. I think, Sean, as well, to answer your question, I think often, speaking from Mercy Corps' perspective, we do have funding. It's 1 year, but often in the same country, we have continual funding from different donors that builds on the programs from year to year. And it's important for us to, in our own monitoring and evaluation systems, to look at how we bridge those gaps between those programs, making sure that we are measuring the impact beyond the program intervention time as well. And we are looking within Mercy Corps at how we do that. How can we start to use technology as well in different ways to be able to measure longer term impact beyond the program life cycle? So thanks for raising that. I know it's a super challenging issue that we're all grappling with as well. There's another question from Hailey. Louise, thank you for your presentation. I can see the SERT recognizes the importance of the informal seed system. How do you see it in relation to country-specific seed policies where it is illegal to distribute a seed that is not certified as seed? And there is an issue of counterfeit seeds if there's no control mechanism. Is that something you can answer, Louise?
Sure. Very important question. The, this document, this manual, this tool can only give better guidance. It can't change laws. It can't influence directly policy. But it can highlight, which we're trying to do, the importance of informal systems in normal times and emergencies. All we can do with this SERT is open the space for better practice. And then people like you have to take it forward in country-specific ways. I think related to this is a question from Bruno, if I may, and he said, you know, can this be used for by governments for planning? I think he said. Sorry, I don't see it in front of me exactly. I think the answer is, you know, this is not about an early warning system, but what this SERT does, we hope it does, is to say emergency seed isn't just about procuring the seed and delivering it. You know, emergency seed security response is much more holistic. You know, think about your goals. Think about the approaches you support. Here are some of the strengths and weaknesses of each approach. So certainly as an awareness raising tool, I think it could be quite important. So it's not just a practical tool for implementers. You know, if used, it could be awareness raising about how do we do and think about seed security response more globally. So in that sense, I think it's quite important. Actually, when I think about it, and I think about the questions of Bruno and Marjan, is you know, this tool, even though it's a practical guide, could influence humanitarian policy, you know, could influence emergency planning in terms of what's included in a seed security portfolio. But I don't want to overblow it. It's how you use it. You know, this is a tool, and then you, the experts, will use it in ways that you think most appropriate.
Thanks, Louise. And just to note, Eric, I'm not sure if I'm missing any questions in French. So Eric, please feel free to jump in. Okay, great. That's a great point. Actually, maybe Abby, we can look into translating into French as well. That would be great. There were a couple of questions around, you know, did we engage farmers in the development of the tool? Did we engage farmers in the audience? How do we engage farmers in the evaluation of our work? Would any of you like to talk to that point?
Well, I don't know if we directly engaged farmers in the tool. I would have to think about it honestly. But what we did is assert the incredible importance of farmer and all stakeholder feedback at very varied stages and continuously. And that's what Principle 10 is actually. Yeah. You know, I just, we couldn't give all the technical detail, but I also see that Margaret's on the call, for instance. You know, we have a lot of things, a lot of items on vegetatively propagated crops. You know, why are they different from some of the seed crops? We couldn't anticipate everything, but we tried to at least hint at some of the bigger issues.
That's great. Thanks, Louise. Yeah, and just to echo, I think, you know, that for us, the site is obviously aimed at implementers and donors, but the farmers, and I think it's also market system actors, it's not just farmers, it's the other market system actors too, that are the heart of the work that is part of the assessment. So I think it's for us as well to make sure that we engage them in the right ways during obviously the information collection process to design the right implementation strategies to meet the specific goals and contexts that they're in. And so again, I would encourage you, whilst you're working with this tool, to be keeping mindful of that and provide guidance to us through the emails that were up on that slide, for any information and improvements that you think should be incorporated from that perspective. I'm trying to see what else we've got here. Steve, I think you made a comment about seed assessments not being made public. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to build on from that point. I think this is a really key part of the SERT and the assessment piece and getting that right. So I think.
Yeah, thank you. I will say that sometimes or oftentimes applicants will put forth the emergency application, and within that application, they'll make a request to do a seed assessment. And we generally say no, unless they make a very clear point of how other participating organizations, not simply the organization receiving the money from BHA, will benefit. Why do we do that? Because we see seed system assessments as being really critical for these to be socialized and to have an effect on the overall system. And this is where there's a challenge when seed assessments are done, but then are not shared with the community. At that point, what is it? Is it reconnaissance information that's used in a sort of secretive manner to inform the strategy of a single organization or to help fund a specific project? We all need to work together. We all need to be one community of practice. And part of that requires that we do things collaboratively. And when we have information, systems-based information, we purport or propose to do seed assessments, we need to share them. We need to do a better job as a community to share assessments when they are done. Over.
Great, thanks. Steve and Wilfred, I know you've worked a lot in seed system assessments as well. Anything else you wanted to add to that?
Well, I think I just
Oh, I think we just lost you, Wilfred. Perfect timing. Never mind, we'll come back to you, Wilfred. On
one. The first part of it.
Let's come back to you, Wilfred, on that one. You just, I know, worked with you in Kenya, so your internet probably just dropped out a little bit. In the meantime, there was one from Ed Walter. You mentioned, Ed, that it's always tough to balance a simple tool that non-experts can use and the need for experts who can provide a more nuanced look at the options. I think, Steve, this speaks to your point a little bit on, working as a community. And I know I would say not struggle, but discuss this quite a bit within our own agency, where within the humanitarian context, you might not have individual technical experts. And we also discussed this a lot when we were developing the SERT, who really is going to use it? What a level of information do we include? We don't want to make it too long, but there are some critical seed system elements that people need to understand before they go into designing any seed intervention. So I don't know if maybe Louise, I know you were involved in that a lot, and Steve, if you wanted to comment on that.
So sorry, I don't know what you might want me exactly to comment on, but I did want to acknowledge before we close that when you look at the SERT, please look at the references and the further reading and the other resources out there. We do tie you to specialty advice on the vegetatively propagated crops, for instance, and the whole huge range of work. I think it's called the Seed for Tools group. We do link you to the FAO seed quality guides. If you need to know these for the best seed quality advice, go to these 3 guides. We do link you to ISSD, of course. We link you to gender programming and seed security. So the SERT itself at this point is 70 pages, which is big. It can't do everything, but minimally we would like to link you to not just our global advice, but the specialty advice, which can maybe address some of your needs better. Some of you asked about community seed banks. We don't really address that in the SERT, but certainly in the reference section, you can find the resources you need. The SERT was developed by a core group, but it really draws from this huge, wonderful worldwide expertise, and we recognize that with many of you on this call here.
Thanks, Louise. And I think that's a great point to finish on, because it just touches again on how much is out there and how much is referenced and linked to in the document as well. And as we mentioned, this is an overview, a practical overview guide. So I realize that we're at the top of the hour. I just want to take a moment to thank all our speakers again: Stephen Walsh, Louise Sperling, Meseret Getahan, and Wilfred Uko, and critical support from James and Abby in the background there. Thanks so much for all of your time and input on this. And also thank you to all of you for joining us today, for your questions. We will get to those that we didn't ask today. We'll respond to those via email and send you that with all the links. And you will receive a link to the webinar, to the presentation, and to the document in the next couple of days. So my final request, I think you've heard it a few times in the session today, is please use the SERT, test it, see what works, let us know what could be improved, and let's make sure that this guide is something that we really use as a collective and engage with and improve our SeedSystem's work in emergency context moving forward. Thanks very much for everyone for your time today.